Sybil kind of perturbation to it after the death of the being man. And all the atheistic theories maintained just the opposite. In short, my boy, when we arrived in the city of Babylon, there was then proceeding what is called the building of the Tower of Babel. Having uttered these latter words, Beelzebub became a little thoughtful, and then continued as follows. Now, I wish to explain to you about the expression I just used, namely, the building of the Tower of Babel. This expression is very often used on your planet by the contemporary three-brained beings there also. I wish to touch upon this expression frequently used there and to elucidate it to you chiefly because, firstly, I chanced to be a witness at that time of all the events which gave rise to it, and secondly, because the history of the arising of this expression and its transubstantiation in the understanding of your contemporary favorites can very clearly and instructively elucidate to you that, thanks as always to the same abnormally established conditions of ordinary being existence, no precise information of events there which have indeed occurred to beings of former epochs ever reach beings of later generations. And if by chance something like this expression does reach them, then the fantastic reason of your favorites constructs a whole theory on the basis of just one expression such as this, with the result that those illusory being ego plasticuri, or what they call psychic picturings, increase and multiply in their presences, owing to which there has arisen in the universe the strange, unique psyche of the three-brained beings, which every one of your favorites has. Well then, when we arrived in the city of Babylon, and began mixing with various beings there and making my corresponding observations in order to elucidate the question which had interested me, then, because almost everywhere I ran across the said learned beings who had gathered and met there in great numbers, it so fell out that I began associating with them alone, and made my observations through them, and also through their individualities. Among the number of the learned beings whom I met for my mentioned aim, was also one named Hamolinadir, who had also been brought there by compulsion from Egypt. Well, during these meetings of ours, almost the same relations were established between this terrestrial three-brained being, Hamolinadir, and myself, as in general are established everywhere between three-brained beings who frequently meet. This Hamolinadir was one of those learned there in the common presence of whom the factors for the impulses of a three-brained being which had passed to him by heredity were not quite atrophied. And moreover, it turned out that during his preparatory age, the responsible beings around him had prepared him to be also more or less normally responsible. It is necessary to notice that many learned beings of this kind were then in the city of Babylon. Although this learned Hamolinadir had his arising and preparation for becoming a responsible being just there in the city of Babylon, and descended from the race of beings there called Assyrian, yet he became learned in Egypt, where the highest school existing on earth at that time was found, and which was called the School of Materializing Thought. At the age he was when I first met him, he already had his eye in respect of rationally directing what is called the automatic psychic functioning of his common presence, at the maximum stability for three-centered beings of the planet at that time. In consequence of which, during what is called his waking passive state, he had very definitely expressed being manifestations, as for instance those called self-consciousness, impartiality, sincerity, sensibility of perception, alertness, and so forth. Soon after our arrival in Babylon, I began going with this Hamolinadir to various what are called meetings of the mentioned learned beings, and listened to every kind of what they called reports upon the very question which was then the question of the day, and which was the cause of the agitation of the minds of the whole of Babylon. This friend of mine, Hamolinadir, was also very much excited about the said burning question. He was agitated and perplexed by the fact that both the already existing and the many newly appearing theories upon this question were all, in spite of their entirely contradictory proofs, equally convincing and equally plausible. He said that those theories in which it was proved that we have a soul were very logically and convincingly expounded, and likewise those theories in which quite the contrary was proved were expounded no less logically and convincingly. So that you may be able to put yourself in the place of that sympathetic Assyrian, I shall also explain to you that in general on your planet, then in the city of Babylon as well as at the present time, all the theories on such a question, as they call it, of the beyond, or any other elucidation of details of any definite fact, are invented by those three-brained beings there, in whom most of the consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer are completely crystallized, in consequence of which there actively functions in their presence that being property which they themselves call cunning. Owing to this, they consciously, of course consciously only with the sort of reason which it has already become long ago proper for them alone to possess, and moreover merely automatically, gradually acquire in their common presence the capacity for spotting the weakness of the psyche of the surrounding beings like themselves. And this capacity gradually forms in them data which enables them at times to sense and even to understand the peculiar logic of the being around them. And according to these data, they invent and propound one of their theories concerning this or that question. And because, as I've already told you, in most of the three-brained beings there, owing to the abnormal conditions of ordinary being existence established there by them themselves, the being function called instinctively to sense cosmic truths gradually atrophies. Then, if any one of them happens to devote himself to the detailed study of any one of these theories, he is bound, whether he wishes or not, to be persuaded by it with the whole of his presence. Well, my boy, already 7 of their months after our arrival in the city of Babylon, I once went with this friend of mine there, Hamolinadir, to what is called a general learned conference. This general learned conference had already been convened at that time by the learned beings previously brought there by force, and thus there were at this conference not only the learned forcibly assembled there by the mentioned Persian king, who in the meantime had already got over his craze about the science of alchemy and forgotten all about it, but many other learned also from other communities who had voluntarily gathered, as they then said, for the sake of science. At this general learned conference that day, the reporters spoke by lot.